Hello everybody! This video will go over word choice and imagery. This video is especially important because in addition to talking about these two terms, I'm also going to walk you through the process that I'm asking you to do for your very first journal entry. The two terms I'm going to go over are word choice and imagery, and I'll start with word choice. Word choice, which is sometimes called diction, a term that you may have heard from a high school English teacher, refers to the specific words that writers use when composing works of literature. When we pay attention to specific words, we should consider both the denotations, in other words, dictionary meaning of words, and the connotations, in other words, the emotions and ideas that are associated with a specific word. For example, the denotation of the word pink is a pale red color. That's the dictionary definition for that word. Some connotations of pink might be femininity or beauty. There's also probably some other connotations that we could come up with as well. So those are ideas that are associated with that word, but aren't necessarily the dictionary definition of that word. Another example would be the word eagle. So the denotation of the word eagle is a large bird of prey, right? That's the dictionary definition for that word. Some connotations for the word eagle might be things like strength, grace, or even patriotism. Those are ideas or sort of even feelings that people might associate with that word, but aren't necessarily the dictionary definition of that word. So both the dictionary definition and the connotations of words are important when we're thinking about word choice in literary works. The next term I'll talk about is imagery. When talking about literary works, we use the term image or imagery to refer to language that addresses the senses. The most common images in poetry are visual. So this is language that addresses the sense of sight. But images and imagery can address any of the five senses. So it could also address the sense of hearing, the sense of taste, the sense of touch, the sense of, I'm missing one, but that's okay. You get the idea. It can address any of those senses, so not necessarily just sight. So to talk about how this works, I'm going to sort of walk through close reading, which is the word we use to talk about analyzing literature, a passage from a story that you'll be reading for this week. So this is a passage from the short story Summer by David Updike. And as I'm reading this passage and thinking about this passage, I'm going to be considering the question, how does Updike use word choice and imagery in this passage to develop the setting of the story? So thinking about how word choice and imagery help to sort of enrich our understanding of the setting and reveal aspects of the setting. So I'll go ahead and just read this passage out loud. And then after I do that, I'm going to go back and look at some specific words and specific images. The passage reads, "Into the humid days of August, a sudden rain fell, leaving the sky a hard, unbroken blue, and the nights clear and cool. In the morning, when he awoke, leaving Fred a heap of sighing covers in his bed, he stepped out into the first rays of sunlight that came through the branches of the trees and sensed, in the cool vapor that rose from damp pine needles, the piercing cry of a blue jay that something had changed." So the first thing I'm going to do in order to analyze this passage and answer this question that I have is to go back and identify any words or images that I think are interesting or provocative or that can sort of specifically help me understand the setting. So in front of you, you can see that I have underlined some words and I've put some words in bold. So the words that I've put in bold are words, specific words that I want to think about not just the sort of dictionary definition of, but also the kind of connotations that those words have. And then the words that I have underlined are words that I see as appealing to one of the five senses, being, in other words, imagery that I think is especially sort of evocative and can sort of evoke certain sensations and feelings that are tied to the setting of the story. So the words that I've chosen are August, rain, and morning, and then the imagery that I've underlined are humid, which appeals to sort of your sense of touch, cool, which also appeals to the sense of hot touch, cool again, and then the damp pine needles, which I see as appealing to your sort of sense of smell, but could also appeal to other senses as well. So, and I've broken these down into sort of two columns. So if you think back to the passage, the narrator says that something had changed. Something had sort of changed in the atmosphere, had changed in the setting after this rain comes. So I've broken them down into words and images that describe the sort of setting before the rain, and then words and images that describe the setting after the rain. So words and images that describe the setting before the rain are the word August, which is, a word that, is the name of the month, but it's the last month of summer. But for me, at least, it's also associated with sort of long, sort of hot summer days. At the peak of summer when the days just are really long and it gets really hot and sometimes you're just sort of exhausted and sticky and you just, are sort of sometimes even just waiting for fall to come so you can cool down a little bit. And then the other image that I've picked out that from this sort of description of what happens, how things feel before the rain is the word humid. So this is an image that appeals to the sense of touch for me, and it evokes sort of a hotness and a stickiness. So putting these two things together, to me it seems like the word choice and the imagery are evoking this sense of sort of hotness and stickiness and humidity and sort of uneasiness and maybe even kind of restlessness before the rain comes. And that's based on, these sort of words and these images that to me carry these associations. And then as far as the images and words that I feel like are associated with the period after the rain, I've picked the word morning, which is, sort of its dictionary meaning, right, is the beginning of the day, but it's associated with sort of peacefulness and quietness, at least for me. And then I've picked the image rain, which to me, that's sort of a word that appeals to my sense of hearing, like the sound of rain, but also touch. So, when you sort of feel rain on yourself, it's sort of cool and refreshing, almost like sort of like taking like a shower or something like that. And then also the image cool, which the narrator uses twice. And that's an image that, again, appeals to the sense of touch, right? When you hear the word cool, you imagine sort of a cool breeze or a cool wind that's sort of soothing and pleasant. And then finally, the image of sort of these damp pine needles, which to me is an image that appeals to the sense of smell. And for me, someone who grew up in an area that had a lot of damp pine needles, to me it's sort of this sort of soothing and refreshing and calming sensation. So putting all of these words and these images together, to me it feels like the narrator is presenting the setting, at least after the rain comes, as sort of cool and refreshing and peaceful and pleasant. And it's opposed to this period that happens before the rain, which is sort of hot and sticky and uneasy. So that's an example of how we can, sort of break down a passage, look at the word choice and the imagery, and unpack how that word choice and imagery helps to, enrich our understanding of a setting. We can also do this in order to understand characters better or to understand themes better as well. And in your journal for this week, I'm going to be asking you to do something like this and basically identify a passage from one of the assigned stories and then pick some words and some images from that passage and think about how those can enrich and help us better understand either the setting of the story or a specific character. So let me know if you have questions with that, and I look forward to seeing what you have to say about the word choice and the imagery and the stories for this week.